This week, Jason and I critique Here to Cypher, an anthology of stories written by Brandon Hayes, whose story Thready we enjoyed back in January. Does this set of stories stack up against that book? Find out after this.
Salwete. My name is Stella, and I am the host of Back Row to Oracle, the Barbara Gordon podcast. Back Row to Oracle is a podcast dedicated to Barbara Gordon, the first woman to hold the mantle of back row for an extended period of time, roughly 1967 to 1988. The goal of Back Row to Oracle is to examine the character's history from her first appearance as Batgirl and continuing through her tenure as Oracle. Each episode looks at a vintage issue of Detective Comics or Batman, as well as other books like Justice League and Freedom Fighters, and modern issues of Batgirl and Birds of Prey. I also keep track of news involving Batgirl and other members of the Bat family, and I have a revolving series of segments like Babs in the Tube, which highlights appearances of Babs in TV and film, Shipper Spotlight, which looks at a variety of comic and pop culture couples, gives their history, and determines whether they are hot or not. Reading with Stella, which could be described as an audio drama, or just me reading a book that relates to Babs or doesn't, and of course, the mainstay literature recommendation. I have been blessed to interview writers Scott Beatty and Chuck Dixon on their Batgirl Year 1 work, Brian Q. Miller on his Batgirl run, Dwayne Swarzynski and Christy Marks on their separate Birds of Prey work, and the creators and actors of the Batgirl Spoiled, the web series. I hope to interview more creators and actors in the future. My goal, most importantly, is to make a fun, entertaining, and thoughtful show that people enjoy and from which they learn. Find the show online at thebatmanuniverse.net and iTunes, and follow the show on Facebook and Twitter at Backroll to Oracle. Thank you, and fly on, Babs lovers.
This is Tim.
This is Jason.
Oh, and someone else identified themselves too.
Get down, you sumbitch.
What did the dog say?
He's yelling at people outside.
What's his name?
Hey. His name's Gus. I will stomp you into the ground, buddy.
Okay.
Gus.
So that's Gus.
That's Gus, buddy.
And this is Critiquing Comics.
Yeah, buddy.
We'll just keep that. Welcome to Critiquing Comics. This is Tim in Tokyo with Jason and Gus in Portland, Oregon.
Gus is feeling very verbal tonight. I apologize. He doesn't understand reflections. So when he sees my reflection in the glass, he thinks that there's some ugly guy who looks just like me trying to break in.
All right. So we have a comic. This is a set of stories by Brandon Hayes, who was the writer of Thready, a comic about being bipolar that Jason and I talked about last January in Critiquing Comics 211. This book is called Here to Cypher, 2 being the number 2, done with various artists. And I found this book frustrating.
Did you?
For several reasons. First of all, the table of contents doesn't give page numbers. And some of the stories, the only place their title appears is in the table of contents. So I was scrolling back and forth in the PDF trying to figure out which story went with which title, and was this and this part of the same story or not, or are these two separate things? And I finally think I figured it out.
It is not always clear when one story ends and the next begins, because these aren't really stories. They're almost like vignettes. And in some cases, I think they're just pinups. Right.
Well, the second frustrating thing I had was that some of the stories just seemed to kind of end, and I was like, are there pages missing from the PDF? Although one of them said Finn at the end, so I guess that's the end. But it didn't feel like it in terms of what was happening in the comic.
Yeah, that's what I mean. They're not stories. I mean, we can't critique these as stories because they're not stories. They're vignettes, or they are moments, or they're almost like writing exercises. Like they were given like a writing prompt. Mm-hmm. And very few of them. It's because the artists are all pretty good.
Yeah.
But they're all pretty similar, so it is hard to know when we have stopped being in a moment and we're in another moment. The exception being the main story, called Man's Last Days, which is the most complete in that it is a full story. It has a lot of text. It is the most professionally polished of all the pieces, but I couldn't follow it.
Yeah, I mean, it has something to do with aliens, and our narrator Aang meets another guy. What was his name?
Lynx?
Well, no, Lynx is the guy who introduces the two of them.
Ray? Rand.
Rand, yes, Rand. I mean, Aang is apparently he's involved in something, but it's not quite clear what. And Rand is like into sex with aliens, apparently. But yeah, there was something there that just wasn't getting across to me, and apparently, Aang has voices in his head at some stages. But yeah, I couldn't really follow it either.
It feels like, do you remember Mad Magazine would do these like comic strips, and they were so dense with text? That is sort of what this feels like. So when you're dealing with sci-fi or going someplace unique, a unique world, it's always helpful to get the setup right away, and then you introduce what goes wrong in that setup, right? Like Blade Runner has replicants. Okay, now they're loose. That changes things. But this story it's all set up into the last panel. They're still introducing new. They never get into the story. I'm just like besieged with information. It's well illustrated. It's just so dense, and I could not follow it at all. But it looks good.
Yeah, it looks good, but yeah, you just feel like there's something that he's not getting around to telling us here. I feel like there's some information that Aang is just assuming that we have that we don't actually have.
I think that there's an assumed suspense that is not connecting the way that he probably intended. Also, this artist is pretty good. If you only had access to this artist for 5 pages, this could be a 20-page story that was condensed into 5 pages to meet the artist's budget.
Marco Svraka.
Yeah,
S-V-R-A-K.
I mean, this is the best art in the book. But it is a 20 to 24 page story done in 5 pages, so it is breakneck and it's moving so fast you really can't follow it. So the sort of twist ending, it doesn't really land because you're still just in perpetual WTF mode the entire time.
Yes.
Like, wait, now we're doing this? Now we're here? Now we're on the moon? Wait, what? Wait, what? We're murdering sex. I was like, okay. All of it would look cool on a coffee mug, though. I'll tell you that. I would say all of the artists actually in this have a good style. The next story starts with this great pinup of these 6 characters, and it's such a detailed, beautiful piece. And then the following story is 1 page.
Right. Well, and it took me several passes to realize that those went together because they're by different artists, and apparently this is the bit called Universal Live Society. And yeah, I finally made the connection because I saw on the second page, one of the characters has just taken the photo that we saw drawn by a different artist on the first page.
Oh, I didn't even catch that. I just thought that the main dude has a beanie.
And yeah, there's some of the same characters. You can kind of, oh yeah, this is that person and this is that woman, and okay. But because they're by different artists, it felt like 2 separate things initially.
Yeah, and that's the thing is, in an anthology, one of the joys of an anthology is that you're watching all these different art styles, especially from one writer, how they interact or how they collaborate with all these different artists. But most of these artists are somewhat similar. Like no one has a really strikingly different style except for that 5-pager that we talked about. All the other styles really could have been from the same artist. So I think that's, if anyone's listening and they want to make an anthology, you want your stories, you want to know when you've left one story and gone into the other. And obviously for print, you don't want to add chapter breaks, but for a PDF like this, you could absolutely put chapter breaks or even just a little text. One of them actually does have text in it, Roses. But that one was probably intended to be a short piece, whereas these other ones were not conceived probably to go into an anthology. So it's hard to know if these feel like the moments themselves are well written and well illustrated.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, that 5-pager is a story on. I would have to smoke a bowl of speed, I think, to understand man's last days. But like the art in the first 2 pages, I think are my favorite in the book. They're so good, but they don't go. There's no story following them up. There's like a splash page that I love, a follow-up page continuing from the splash page. I'm like, awesome. How did that guy get in the cornfield? Where does he go next? So
right. I guess that's the drop.
And that's the drive. It's 2 pages, a splash page and a follow page.
Yeah, so I know that character at the end, he's identified as Bobby, and I noticed that Bobby was mentioned in several of the other stories, but I couldn't really make what the connection was. There's something about this guy, Bobby, and something about aliens that's kind of running through much of the book, but...
Oh, you're right. You're right.
Because, like, after the guy takes the pictures I was talking about in that Universal Live Society, he's talking about his beef with Bobby. And then, after that 1 page of conversation, then we go into The Gaslight, which Brandon drew himself. And that they're talking about Bobby in that one, too. But there's also an alien in that one. But I couldn't really figure out what that one was trying to say either.
Yeah, and then there's a one-piece story called Roses, which is, again, like for 1 page of a comic, it's good. It's done well. It's written well. It's illustrated well. You know what this feels like to me is if you buy a graphic novel and they have like short story extras in the back. That's what this feels like. I think if you do a Thready, I'm talking to the creator now. I'm talking to Brandon. If you do a Thready trade paperback, a continuation of the story that you sent us in January, and these are all extras in the back, that's awesome. That's like this extra added bonus. Because at that point, everything's gravy. We've got a complete story, and now we're seeing little moments where you perfected your craft and got to collaborate with different people and show us different sides of yourself. And I think that's awesome. As a standalone comic, none of these are long enough, with the exception of the 5-page one, Man's Last Days, which is honestly just banana cakes confounding to follow. And it might just be me. I have not seen a comic book with this much text on a page in 30 years.
Yeah, since the 60s, yeah.
Yeah, it is. And it's trying to evoke something different for sure. Like, I get that it's intentional. It's just really hard to wrap my eyes around that as a layout.
Yeah. I mean, Roses is the clearest what's going on. They're just, this guy's father has died, and it's at the graveside and saying goodbye to him, and that's it. No aliens, no Bobby.
But it would be a great opener to a story, right? Like if this was the first page.
Yeah, you want more. Like, okay, so all right, well, tell us more about the dad, or what's the story here? I mean, it's completely comprehensible for what it is, but yeah, it's you kind of feel for him, but beyond that, it's like you want something more.
Yeah, with one exception, these stories are all top out at 2 pages, which is not really enough to get any sort of momentum or closure. So, from moment to moment, writing exercise, it's interesting. I think these are all better served as an addendum to a larger, more coherent, fully rendered piece. But as someone learning their craft, it's it's a good example of what this creator can do in very, very small increments. So please, please, please include this as extras in your Thready trade paperback. But as a reading experience, there's not enough here. There's not enough there to really get any momentum in a narrative. And the Bobby thing and the space thing, I mean, this may be part of a bigger piece now that you mention all those things. Or it could be, just some sort of Lynchian weirdness that only Brandon knows. And that's fine too. Sometimes if there's like an invisible structure in a book, you don't have to understand it, but you just have to know that someone else does, and there is a shape and form to it. And this, I just feel like it. It made me miss acid. It's been a long time since I've taken acid, and this made me miss acid.
This is the key to understanding.
Yeah, so that's the quote you can put on the front of this. It made me miss acid.
So Brandon mentioned that this book is currently not available, but he's doing a Kickstarter in December to get more copies printed. So I guess it's flying off the shelves.
Well, okay. Well, if you want to fly off the shelf, draw Batman on the cover. Okay, so my recommendation to Brandon is do a Kickstarter to do more of these, or more Thready. Print, unless you're doing a lot of conventions and you need print copies to hand sell, I think this can live as a digital. I would put this on my website as a digital freebie, just to show people, hey, I can work with artists. Hey, I can write small pieces. This is sort of like a portfolio that you give people. Here's 20 pages of sequential stuff, different artists that I've worked with. I would hazard against, selling this, recommending this to someone going in cold. Like, here, spend $5, get a copy of this, and spend the rest of the afternoon scratching your head. So, I would do more Thready, maybe a longer here to Cypher, more longer pieces, because you have to pay your artists. I understand that. Mm-hmm. Artists are not cheap, and you want to pay your collaborators. So I understand why you do smaller pieces, but I don't know that I would spend my energies kickstarting this to get copies. This is sort of like the test case. When you almost like a DVD extra of the director's short films. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would continue on with Thready. I think that's a real winner, and these are nice little bonuses that you can put in the back of that. But that's just my advice. I've been looking at a lot of thesis papers lately, so this is what I'm trying to perfect your thesis proposal, Brandon. But you do what you want. You're a creator. You don't need anyone's advice. Go kick ass. Go kick ass.
All right. So, listeners, if you would like us to critique your comics, send a PDF or a link to mail@deconstructingcomics.com, and we'll read it and talk about it. I've got a couple more comics in the queue. I'm getting ready to move, so I'm not quite sure how soon we're going to get to them. I might be able to stuff in one or both of them before that. I've still got a month before I have to be out of here, so we'll see how it goes.
Well, the holidays throw everyone's schedule up in the air, but I'm always happy to see people making comics, not waiting for permission, just doing it themselves. And yeah, I want to be as supportful as I can be.
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks for listening, and thank you, Jason.
Thank you, Tim. And thank you, Gus.
Now he's quiet.
Now he's quiet. Yeah.
Brandon's Kickstarter for Here to Cypher is linked from the show notes. You can help the Deconstructing Comics family of podcasts by joining us on Patreon at patreon.com/deconcomics. And go to deconstructingcomics.com to connect to us on Twitter, Facebook, or YouTube, to shop on Amazon to support the show, and to find links to subscribe to the podcast. Our theme is from bensound.com. Next week on Deconstructing Comics, Tokyo Rose. You've probably heard the name, and you know it was applied to an English-speaking woman who broadcast Japanese propaganda to American troops in World War II. But what do you know about the real Tokyo Rose? Tokyo Rose 0 Hour is a new graphic novel from Andre Fratino and Kate Casino that explores who Tokyo Rose really was, how she ended up where she was, the price she was forced to pay, and whether that price was fair. Kumar and I will review the book here next week. Till then, this is Tim, and thanks for listening to Critiquing Comics.